So, you wanna know? Welcome to the Swanna Know podcast. I'm your host, Annalisa Swana. Join us every week as we explore extraordinary conversations of triumph, resilience, and anything you wanna know. So today I'm joined by a very special guest. I know him as a radio presenter, but he's so much
I'm
more
sitting on the other
than
side.
that. And he is sitting on the other side today. Ayabonga Cawe is in studio with us today. How are you? I am good, thank you.
Good.
You know, you're our very first guest.
Really? Oh, thank you so much.
First guest. So we're excited. We're very
Yeah.
excited. Welcome to the Herald
Thank
Swanna
you.
Know podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So, firstly, I'm just going to ask you
Okay.
a few questions. This and that type of question. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay.
On most days. I'm also getting into tea now.
Yeah.
Yeah, Earl Grey. I've always liked the Rooibos.
Age does that too.
Ceylon. Yeah.
Age does that too. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Why?
I've never had a cat. I've always I guess I bought into this idea that cats are like cunning, smart, calculating animals. Yeah.
Alright.
And dogs are loyal.
Dogs are loyal.
Yeah.
That's true. I'm scared of dogs. In my old age.
Really?
I'm scared of dogs. I don't know why, because I grew up with dogs at home.
Even the small ones.
I am scared of dogs. Like, I am that girl. When I go to a house where there's a dog, even if it's the small one, I'm like, please.
So are you those people if you're coming over by
I'm that girl. I'm that
Okay.
girl.
Okay.
And if there is a dog, if you don't mind, can it be somewhere else where we are not?
I have a friend who's literally scared of cats. And this is somebody who's not scared of a lot of things. But I don't know any guy or cats. Yeah.
It's me with dogs.
Yeah.
Beach vacation, mountain retreat.
Ooh. You see, coming from South Africa, you have the fortune sometimes of both. Yeah. So, yeah, let me say mountain retreat for now.
Mountain retreat.
Yeah.
Okay. Fiction or non-fiction books?
I'm big on non-fiction. I've been told now to read a bit more fiction. So I have over the last month or so been trying to read a lot more fiction.
I love fiction because it helps you escape.
It does, but also helps your writing.
It does.
Yeah.
Because it makes you, it revives your creative
And your imagination.
side.
Yeah.
Very true. Early bird, night owl.
Night owl. I hate mornings.
That's why you were late this morning.
Well, that's why I was 3 minutes late. Thanks for giving that away.
Sweet or savory snacks?
Sweet.
Summer, winter?
Summer. I was born in winter though.
Okay.
Yeah. I prefer summer.
I was born in summer, I prefer winter.
Yeah. Why?
Because I know what to wear in winter.
But also, I grew up in Queenstown, so you can't really love winter. You
Yo!
really can't love winter if you've grown up in Komani. It's not a thing.
We from Middle Sea.
Yeah.
So I know, no. Come on, in winter. But I love it because you know what to wear in winter.
Exactly.
You wear your pollinecks, you wear your jackets. In summer,
Yeah.
and places like Queenstown in summer, it is really
It's too hot. Yeah.
It is really hot.
Yeah.
Comedy or drama?
Drama.
You don't like laughing either.
I do like laughing. I just don't know if whenever I watch comedy, I don't know if it pitches to the kind of humor I like.
What is the
So I
kind
like
of
that-
humor you like?
Old, dry, British type comedy. You know? Where the dialogue, I have to sit for a while and be like, oh, okay.
Phone call or text message?
Text please.
Hi.
Text please.
Do you know how much I love hearing people's voices?
I know, but you can also send a voice note, right? No?
No, man, it's like you can answer me here and now on this call.
So I think for me, the difficulty is that a lot of the work I do requires me to be really switched on.
Sure.
And sometimes, you could be working on something for an hour and then get one phone call and your entire rhythm is gone.
Yeah,
So I'm also still one of those people who please send me an SMS. Send me a text. Because even WhatsApp also, no.
Ayabonga. Netflix or YouTube?
YouTube.
Why?
Well, look, I mean, Netflix has defined a narrow choice, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with YouTube, I can look for anything and it's highly likely that I'll find something. Whereas with, Netflix, if I look at genre, like, I like a lot of documentaries.
Sure.
And I also like a lot of thrillers, drama, that kind of thing. So if I'm looking for that, I'll go to Netflix.
Sure.
But if I'm looking for what I normally watch, which is like documentaries and all that kind of stuff, then YouTube's always better.
Okay, that's interesting. Dancing or singing?
Neither. A bit of both. Probably probably dancing.
No.
Yeah. I don't think.
Only because.
Yeah, I don't think I can sing to save my life.
Okay.
I sing in groups, right? Collective singing, not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not
Because that way,
idols.
there's always people with stronger voices around who can like smother. Yeah.
So dancing.
Yeah.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset. Yeah. Love the orange, love that golden hour. Yeah.
Lastly, city life or village life?
So I'm a small town boy, né?
Sure.
And I've lived now for the last just close on 15 years in Joburg. And I can't. So definitely village life. Like,
Really?
yeah. Without a shadow of a doubt. I have more peace of mind when I'm like back in the rural parts of this province in particular. But just being back in the Eastern Cape, like, and that's why a lot of my work is also focused here. So I might be based in Johannesburg, but a lot of like when I'm at my most creative, imaginative, and at my most peaceful is when I'm out of the city. Yeah.
Okay. I tried Joburg.
What happened?
Epic fail.
I don't know, man. Like there's just a mood about it that is
Yeah.
so restless that I used to enjoy it when I was still in university, but I don't anymore. I don't think I do.
So I tried Wits. Went. Was there for 2 weeks. And I was like, no, I can't do this.
When was this?
This was 2010.
Okay, I was in Wits around the same time. Yeah.
I was like, no.
2009.
I can't. And things are far. Everything is far.
Yeah.
You have to take all these taxis. You stay here, but school is there. No,
Exactly.
I'm okay.
But I also think it was a good lesson coming from me from a very small town to like understand how this country is designed.
Sure.
Like, so if you live in Cape Town or Johannesburg and you don't have a car, like life is such an inconvenience. And I think that's something that's quite unique to South Africa. So you travel in other parts of the world and you realize like, public transport takes up such a big share of how people move around. Whereas in South Africa, that's why car sales are always out of the roof, because you can't really move without a vehicle.
And you know what put me off was that I left Wits and they told me, get on this taxi, it will take you to the main taxi line.
To Noord or Brie, yeah.
To Brie.
Yeah.
And then they dropped me at the corner of a street.
Not at the rank, no.
And I had to wait with this guy, like, what is this? Yeah. And they're like, wait with that guy, and then the taxi is going to come. Like, no, I can never.
The worst is like sitting in a taxi and you at the front and you have to count the money, right? And there's people who are going to different places and therefore are paying different amounts. So you sit there and one will be like, 2.6 and like 5.11, and then they give you like 200 rand. So your taxi maths has to be like on higher grade for that. Yeah.
So Ayabonga, tell us, what have you been up to? What have you been doing?
Well, a lot.
I haven't heard you in a while.
A lot. So I was doing Metro FM Talk until about end of March this year. And at the start of the year, I started a new job. So I'm the Chief Commissioner at the International Trade Administration Commission. And really what we do is we issue export and import permits. We also do investigations into customs duty tariffs. So industry comes and they say, look, I'd like the tariffs on potatoes to go up at a certain level, or the tariffs on like a certain component that goes into a vehicle. So we do a lot of that kind of work, which is looking really at leveling the playing field between imports of specific products and the ability to produce those kinds of things domestically. So I'm really enjoying that. It's a fascinating job. I get a fascinating level of detail into certain markets. And I think it just speaks to the nerd in me, like that kind of work.
You know, I didn't think you were a nerd. Okay, I know. Yeah. I know you from Metro Talk.
Sure.
And I enjoyed that show a lot. And really, you did speak about serious things. Yeah. But I never, until now, when I had to research for this podcast, I'm like, no, man, Ayabonga, you're an economist.
Well, the media stuff. Look, I'm not a journalist. Like I never studied journalism. I never studied broadcasting. So my background, I'm an economist by training. That's like my thing. And I come out of like the student movement, student politics and that kind of thing. So a lot of going into the media space for me was an extension of all of that stuff rather than the other way around. So, and now that I think about it, like the first time I got into media was in high school. We had a student's publication.
Sure.
And really all it was, like, I went to a boys' school, so all it was really talking about what was happening across the road at the girls' school, and like talking about like, you know, who's going to be playing on the weekend or whatever. But it did plant a seed that like you could do so many things. It's not just about boxing yourself and saying, I'm going to be an economist, I'm going to go work in a bank, and that's my life. And I knew very early on that I was never going to be that kind of economist. And that I had to be somebody who creates bridges of understanding between different spaces. So if that means at some stage you're going to be in the media, you're in the media.
Okay. If
that means you're going to be in government, which is what I'm doing now, you're going to be in government. Tomorrow, I might be in academia. And I do teach as well, 1 block in a year at WITS.
Okay.
And I find it fascinating. You know?
That's so interesting, man.
Yeah. So I try and do all of these things, but the common thread throughout is this interest that I have in 3 things: money, identity, and power, and how all of these things come together and intersect. Yeah.
Wow. Have you always known that you'd be an economist? That's the route you will take in study?
No, actually not. So I didn't go to a school that offered economics as a subject. And I remember the first time where the seed was planted. We had this thing at school called like the 12 Club. And the idea was to get all of the grades 11 and 12, like top 10 academics in each grade, and they'd be invited to join this club. And all it was, you would meet on a Sunday and like talk about all the things that you would not talk about in a classroom or in the debating society or whatever. So, I mean, I remember some of the topics. Imagine this is like 2007, 2008, and people then were talking about AI, right? I remember I presented my one on North Korea. But what became a common thread in all of these meetings was all of us would hit up against this one problem. And the teacher was in charge always used to say, well, I wish I knew more economics because it might be economics that explains that. I then applied to go to Rhodes and WITS. Initially to study accounts at Rhodes. I ended up not going. And then I signed up for a Bachelor of Economic Science because that was the only thing that still had space at WITS.
That's brave.
Yeah. So, look, my mom was like, hey, you applied late, so I just gained those out. Like, you'll see what you do. And then I spent about that first year just trying to find my bearings. 2 weeks in, I dropped the economic science, did a BCom law. And by the end of my first year, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I ended up finishing off and majoring in applied economics and finance. And then did honors in development economics and then a master's as well, So I didn't always know that I wanted to do economics, but I think it explained so many things that were of intellectual, social, and political curiosity for me that it was, it was a perfect fit.
It was the perfect thing to do. That's so interesting. Like, I'd never do that. I play it safe.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what you know. You know English. You know your languages very well.
Yeah.
Go into journalism, girl.
So I'm quite fortunate, right? So I think the language bug I got from my mother. So she's like isiXhosa, anthropology major, and has taught English for most of her life. And she now works for the Department of Education as a curriculum advisor. And so even then I always knew like I was writing already in high school. And I knew that whatever course I chose, I would always have the opportunity to communicate. And if that's on radio, good. If that's via a column, I've been writing now, let me think about it. Probably my 7th year writing a column for the Business Day. Yeah, so for me, whatever I do, that will always be a part of who I am, because I feel like I've been given gifts in that area that I can't really just, let go.
Oh, okay. So, Ayabonga, I saw you in our library the other day at the Hero Drive.
You're going to see a lot of me now, because I'm going to come quite often.
What are you doing?
I'm writing my 2nd book. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah, I'm writing my 2nd book.
Okay.
And you'd know the first one was titled The Economy on Your Doorstep. And it was really for me saying, I've learned all of this stuff in my academic training, but also in the early parts of my career, on microeconomic stories of parts of this country that I knew and that I felt I could confidently speak about. And so it was really a cumulative development of stories that I picked up from places like Mount Frere, Komani, where I'm from, parts of Kabeja and Nelson Mandela Bay area. And the idea had been to say, here's the economy on my doorstep. This is how I see it. And this is how I see the agenda of changing that economy. So that it is able to, in outcomes, produce an environment where people can realize their potential. So many people are out of work. So many people, have this deep sense of hopelessness. And a lot of that has to do with deep levels of economic inactivity. If I grew up in an environment where people say, go to school, go to university, and your talent will be put to use. And people my age, many of them a decade out of university, some have never had work. It says there's something wrong at a systemic level. And so it was important to say, at a structural level, where does this economy come from? How did things get to be where they are? And so in the 2nd book, I take the same approach.
Okay.
But in this time around, I'm really trying to hone in on 3 parts of this province. So a big part of my work, really, I think, is focused on or draws lessons from the East.
Sure.
And that's applied in the work I do now at ITAC, which, of course, many firms benefit from our work in this area.
Okay.
But also, I think the work that I've done with the district development model, a lot of the muse has been the province of the Eastern Cape.
Please, before we move from there, tell us how firms in the Nelson Mandela Bay area can benefit from your work.
Well, so maybe in 2 ways. I think the one is, the port of Port Elizabeth and the port of Mocha are critical exporting zones.
Sure.
And also critical importing zones. So we do a lot of permitting in the area for specific products. So if you are importing products that are on the prohibited or restricted list, you have to be issued with a permit, and similarly so for exports. But in addition to that, and I've had some fascinating discussions in the last few weeks when I was here with some of these firms, some of the firms would need raw materials. So let me give you one example. There's a linen manufacturing business not too far from Kwazakele.
Okay.
And those who know will know exactly what I'm talking about. Now that firm, from time to time, needs to import certain fabrics that aren't produced in the country.
Sure.
But they would pay a tax on that. And now our view as a government in our industrial policy framework is to say, we want these firms to invest, we want them to create as many jobs, which benefit the communities of the northern areas of Kwazakele, of Zwide, and so on. But if these companies have to have this extra cost now, because they have to get the materials, say, from China or Thailand or wherever, how do we give them a rebate? And so we process administratively that process of rebates. So in that case, it's rebates on textiles. But even for some of the automotive guys, they get rebates on the leather sometimes that goes into the cars they make, or any components that aren't necessarily produced here. So many of the firms in clothing and textile, food and beverages, and in the automotive sector here in the Bay Area would benefit from the work we do. Yeah. So a big part of the second book then is to say, having understood and set out this history, which I think is quite important, and you know, I don't think we know as much about where we come from as we would like, you know, and I think coming, as I did, from the student movement and this idea of how do we better contend with colonial history we come from and how do we subvert that. A lot of my work has been important to use history as a method, not just the graphs, not just the maths, but to also use history and people's life stories as an example. So a big part of my work now is in a triangle. So the one part of the triangle is what would be called the Whittlesea, Oxkraal, Gamastone area. The other part is the Fort Beaufort, Cat River side. Okay. And then the other leg is then, Pedi, Kaiskamawu, King Williamstown. And the idea behind all three of these legs is to say this history of like land reform, for example, starts much earlier. All three of these areas have a history of like mission and Christianity, and that is the first level of a land reform project. But if you actually track it across the century, you find that even the Sky experiment, and that's why I was here in the library, tried to reinforce or subvert that in particular ways. And I think even now we're dealing with the same thing. So some of the questions that arise from this work is, how do we understand, for instance, dairy production in the Oxkraal Gamastone area? How do we understand why there's no longer massive pineapple production for processing in Ngqura, for instance? And what can we learn from that experiment that can inform how we design local economic development strategies, the land reform project itself, but also forms of income support? Because you've got to link the grants into it. You can't be paying like 18 million grants every month and not following the money.
Sure, that is so interesting because I am from that area. And when you speak Cat River, there's a lot of citrus farming
for export. Yes. So for me, take Cat River, fascinating example. So we grow up in South Africa, right? With this idea that there are African people, there are colored people, there are Indian people, and then there are white people. But Cat River is one of the first examples in the Eastern Cape of, if you think of these as distinct categories, a multiracial society. Yes. Right? Cat River, before many of those large commercial citrus farmers you see there, was actually land that was given to a group of Xhosa and, at the time, Khoisan descent and, Honakwa people. And they were the first ones who made a shot at making that land productive. So much so that nearly close to 150 years ago, they were exporting oranges from that part of the world. Not too far from here, in Ianon, same thing was happening. And it was people who now would be called colored, who are in that part of the world, in the citrus-growing Sundays River Valley, who 200 years ago were exporting citrus to Germany. Now, I grew up in the Eastern Cape, I didn't know this story. And so for me, a lot of the work I've tried to do in excavating that history, in so many ways has also changed me. It's changed how I understand my surroundings, it's changed how I think about what the future ought to look like, because in many ways it kind of opens the bounds of how we can imagine that different future.
Okay. When is the book coming out?
Well, I'm still writing it, so... I hope it's out by 2025, the start of 2025. I don't get as much time to write as I'd like. I also now am trying to read a bit more fiction, so I can't be stuck reading, reports, newspaper archives. But I've got a skeleton of the book, and I'm planning in the second half and in the second half of this year and the second half of next year to do some field work and to do a bit more archival work. And I'm hoping it's a book that will not just resonate with people who understand these areas, but also for people to ask themselves, I might be in Mpumalanga. Surely the book should give me some tools to be able to better understand my own environment using the method that the book uses.
All the best in writing. All the best in writing. Why is it so important to you, Ayabonga? Like, as we're talking now, why is it so important to you that we know our identity? Why is that a thing for you?
Well, it's a map, right? So people who don't know who they are, where they come from, will have a very hazy sense of where it is they want to go. So things happen to us, right? And we are sometimes unable to contextualize what those things mean because a fundamental disconnect has happened between who we are and, you know, what we're supposed to be doing. So for me, it's a very important part of my own life's work, to better understand the origin story. You know, you go to other parts of the world, you go to the States, for instance. Every year, there is somebody who's doing some film or other production talking about the War of Independence, you know, against the British, or, you know, the Reconstruction period, where black people had some chance, or slavery, or any of that. And I don't think we do as good a job in South Africa of doing the same. Now remember, the Civil War in the US is happening at the same time where the wars of dispossession are happening here. I haven't seen a movie about John Msobo, who effectively fought in like 4 of the 9 frontier wars. At the same time where all of that was happening in the US and Europe, we were also engaged in imperial or anti-imperial wars of dispossession here. So I've never seen a film on John Msobo or a children's book or a comic. I've never seen one on, you know, the first ordained preacher of the Free Church of Scotland, Dio Soka. Here, I haven't. We read, you know, and we sing Dio Soka's hymn in churches all the time. We sing Zikana's bell and his hymn all the time in church. But none of us really engage with what that is, right? So for me, I think a big part of my work is to take the privilege I have of having like different platforms within which to operate, and to begin to excavate this history and give it some contemporary relevance. And it's not just about the history, by the way, but it's about saying, you know, what do we understand about that history and the possibilities it gives us now? So for instance, if I think about a big part of what I'm working on at the moment for the second book, so I'm having to go to like a lot of isiXhosa poetry, you know, so Mkai,
Yes.
Chaka, John Solilo, I'm forgetting a few others. But as I go to that work, I mean, this is work written in some cases late 19th century, early 20th century, nearly 100 years ago. And I don't know if this generation is doing that work, right? So if you take Ngugi wa Thiong'o, right? He writes in English and then he stops at some stage and he writes in Kikuyu. We haven't had that moment here. But actually, and that's what I would have thought. But if I go back further and check the work of Mkai, I begin to realize that actually, no, there were people 100 years ago who were probably much further then than where we are now. And I think a lot of the work we need to do is to do this question of psychological reparations, right? So we need to repair a lot of what's been lost, sonzakele, you know, and you see it in how it's then manifested in social things that we see. You see it in how alcoholism ravages our communities, how violence ravages our communities, how gender-based violence, how, you know, there's probably 6 taverns in many of the streets, but no library. So all of these things arise from 1, horrible self-image, 2, inferiority complexes, and 3, the sense of misunderstanding of one's identity and by extension, where they are in this relay of history, right? Because every generation has to kind of take this on and hand it over to the next one. And I think a lot of that continuity, particularly in the lives of African, colored, and Indian communities in South Africa, has been harmed. And so a big part of our generational task is this reparative work. You know, how do we reconstruct our communities? How do we reconstruct our families? And how do we reconstruct our minds personally at an individual level?
That's so true. Yes, Ayabonga, when you said sonzakele, like I felt that. Sonzakele kakhulu. I'm thinking at home. So now our parents have passed on.
Yeah.
That generation.
Yeah, we are the parents now. Yeah.
That. So Umaka's was doing something. And now we're getting called Nifika nini?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Get on with it.
No.
It's like, hi, akobantu.
You are the people.
What do you mean, akobantu?
Now, I'm raising a child now in Johannesburg who has no frame of reference, just as an example, who has no frame of reference about firstly, the procedural elements of ukwenza umsebenzi, right? Because now I don't think I understand it as well as I should. Let's start there. What is the implication of that, right? And if we lose touch with that, what do we put in its place? And I think for me, that's the problem. So we've got, a society where we've lost our bearings in such fundamental ways that it makes it so easy for us to get, sucked into consumerism, sucked into instant, gratification and all of those things, without a much longer term view of what we want with our lives, what we want from our communities, what we want from our households, and what we want from ourselves.
Right. That is something. That is something.
Yeah.
Ayabonga, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's all we have time for today. I was hoping we'd chat some more, but next time then.
Please, and please may this work continue, because I think a big part of healing a lot of the hurt, pain, and I think the brokenness that we have in our communities, all of that is stitched together with the work that you guys do here, with the work that you do, in the papers you issue every morning, which to us might just seem like catching up, but I think for many of you is a labor of love. And long may that work continue. I read the Herald online, by the way. So if I want to catch up with anything that's happening in the Bay Area, I know where to go.
We love that. Thank you so much. But lastly,
Yeah.
if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
Does it have to be one? Does it have to be one?
One, Ayabonga.
One, okay. Give me 30 seconds. Yeah, two, okay. I think the one would be the guy I spoke about in Kai. Definitely, I think, for me, his work as a bridge between two worlds at that time, I think is fascinating. And then I think the second person would be Brenda Fassie.
Nah?
Yeah.
What?
I don't know, man. So for me, I try and write in a way where, and even in some of my work, where a certain chutzpah and cheekiness comes out, right? Because it's not fun if you don't do it like that. And I think for me, in many ways, Brenda Fassie was an embodiment of that unrestricted child and the expressiveness of that unrestricted, unsocialized child in all of us. And I'm not saying I'm not infantilizing Mapuru and saying she was a child, but I'm saying she was able, to find in her the greatest expression of self. And that doesn't mean she was perfect or didn't have her own contradictions, but it just says that, if you can find that place in you, then you can make beautiful things. And I think you see it, man, whenever, her music comes on, wherever you are, in whatever community you're in South Africa, it just takes people somewhere. And so I would have loved to have had, dinner with somebody like that, and Kai as well. And there are many, many others, but I think for me, if there's two who just come to mind all the time, it certainly has to be those two.
Thank you so much, Ayabonga. You coming back now?
Yeah, invite me again. Why not?
Thank you so much. That's all we have for today on Swana No. Swana No more. Tune in again next week. Bye.
By the way, the title's cool. Swana No.